Okay, so good to see that we have a full house. This is a small space, but it's quite cozy. So I hope we can have a good dialogue and discussion. So welcome to this side event on enhancing food and water in the Arab states. We want to talk about the challenges and the opportunities. We have nearly 2 hours, so it's quite a long session. I hope you have stocked up on water and food, so you're not facing insecurity during this side event at least. So my name is Oscar Ekdahl. I work for the World Food Program. I'm based in the Regional Bureau of WFP in Cairo. And there I head up the livelihood, climate and resilience work. Today, as you know, we will talk about the Arab region in particular. And as you know, this region has seen its fair share of conflict, but also structural vulnerabilities linked to food and water. Just as a little bit of a reflection from WFP's perspective, because that can be a little bit of an indication of where this region has been heading over the last 10 to 12 years. In 2010, WFP supported 6.8 million people with food assistance in the region. 2016, that number was 27 million. And this year, we're talking about 37 million people that we want to assist. So things are unfortunately not getting better in this region. And of course, food and water is critical aspects of that. Now, what we want to understand today is what is behind this. What are some of the highlights? What are some of the lessons learned that we're seeing? We have a number of interesting speakers and panelists here today. In terms of the structure, we will begin with 2 opening remarks. Then we will have a presentation, and then we will go into a panel discussion. After the presentation, feel free to ask questions, and of course, during the panel discussion, feel free to come in. We want to try and keep a little bit of an open dialogue. And I hope your ears are still intact, because I know that there's a lot of noise here, so, hopefully your heads are not bleeding. So first, in terms of opening remarks, let me briefly introduce Mr. Håkan Emsgaard, who is the Swedish ambassador to Egypt. We're very keen to hear your reflection on the region, because we think that this region is really at a crossroads right now. We have COP26, but then COP27 also, so it's a golden opportunity. We also want to thank, of course, Sweden for a lot of the support that's been provided. We will hear a little bit about some of those projects today. So thank you very much for being here, Håkan, and the word is yours.
Thank you very much, Oscar, for this introduction, and thank you for organizing this discussion here today on such topical issues that we are going to talk about here. And I think you're absolutely right that we are at the critical crossroad at the moment, because we have multiple crises taking place in parallel. They are all linked in one way or another to the climate changes that we see. And we know that the decisions that we will be taking here today are critical for us as well as for future generations. Today, as you were saying, we will focus on the Arab region, and we will focus on food and food security and water, which is of course very pertinent topics. And if we look into the statistics, we can see that the Arab region indeed is among the most vulnerable regions on the planet, with rising temperatures and negative impacts, and already scarce water resources and problems with food security, which increases, of course, the risks for conflicts and such problems in the region. The Arab states are also, they're water scarce, I said, but they're also import dependent. And if I take my own host country as an example, it's the world's largest importer of wheat, also large importer of food oil and other basic food items, really. And of course, if you see the country and you can see that the Nile is really, in the true sense of the word, a lifeline for Egypt, which of course makes it vulnerable in this sense. We were honored and proud that our Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson, who was here on his third week in government, had the possibility to co-chair the roundtable among heads of state and government, together with Kenya's President Ruto, indeed on food security. And he underlined exactly the link between food security and climate changes, and how these two are connected to each other, and also how we need to, by joint efforts, deal with the challenges we have coming from Russia's aggression towards Ukraine, coming from the global inflation that we are seeing, and other global challenges that we have to deal with at the moment. He also had a bilateral with David Beasley of the World Food Programme and got an update on the global situation, which was very much appreciated. Now, the climate crisis is going on as we speak, and we know that the last couple of years we have seen some of the highest temperatures ever recorded in many parts of the world. We see forest fires, we see droughts, we see storms, floods, all that pose risks, of course, to the food system in particular. And these climate changes risk undermining the efforts to have a resilient food system or production system in the world. Of course, situation is even more difficult in some parts of the region, and here I'm thinking in particular about Yemen, where you see hunger, food insecurity, malnutrition, and this is all driven by the protracted conflict, of course, and the climate change, which is contributing to this. And at least the last figure I saw there was that 19 million people only in Yemen are what we call food insecure. So that says something about the challenges that we are facing. Sweden has been deeply engaged in the Yemen conflict for many years now. We have had 2 conferences in Stockholm where we are trying to gather the parties to the conflicts and try to find a way forward. And we are, of course, fully behind the UN Special Representative Lars Grundberg in his efforts in dealing with the conflict in Yemen. We also have a special part of our regional program that is dedicated to Yemen directly. And I know also that we are working with the World Food Programme to provide wheat from Ukraine to Yemen specifically. On the climate issue, we have a goal in Sweden that says that we should have 0 net emissions by 2045. That goal remains with our new government. And we are working with our partners, and we are encouraging our partners to set similarly ambitious goals. At the same time, we know that for many developing countries, the situation is a little bit different, and that the first priority might be to develop pathways and building climate resilience, and that this has to be done, of course, with the resources that are available in each country situation. We, Sweden, we continue to stand ready to support developing countries in implementing their national plans and the projects and their ambitions in this regard. And here I'd like to say that we have indeed a new government, and this government express themselves slightly differently when it comes to foreign aid. So we don't talk in terms of percentages, we talk in terms of figures and volumes. There is also a certain difference in emphasis. There is a stronger emphasis on civil society, for instance, that we have seen before. There is a stronger emphasis on the connection and the positive connection between international trade and foreign aid, which is manifested that we have a minister who has a responsibility for both these areas. And this is Johan Forsell, who was here 2 days last week, actually, in one of his first foreign trips to be here at the COP. But what is important to say that this doesn't mean that there is a lowering of the ambition from the Swedish side, but there is a change in the way we talk about this, and there is a change in emphasis. Now, this also means that we, as well as many other countries, have an increased emphasis on the private sector. And this has been a subject of many seminars and side events during these 2 weeks. And the private sector is very important in 2 ways. One is the solutions, to find the ways forward when it comes to carbon-free steel or new technologies for batteries or for making solar energy 24/7, things like that. But also for the financing, because we of course are one of the largest contributors to the objective of having $100 billion a year, and we want to achieve this, we need to achieve this, but we know at the same time that these $100 billion are not sufficient for all the things we need to do. We need to mobilize, we must mobilize the private sector if we want to achieve all these ambitious goals that we have. And we see these in the so-called JET piece, we see these in the corresponding Egyptian program, the NOAFI program, who builds on a cooperation and a partnership with many different partners, including public and private partners. And I think, and we think, that this is the way we need to go for the future. We are contributing to this through our International Development Agency, SIDA, and we have one regional program which is called the Climate Action for Human Security, where we are focusing especially on the countries, the crisis countries in the region, and where we are working indeed with the World Food Programme, UNDP, League of Arab States, Arab Water Council, UNEP, UN Habitat, and many partners in this particular program. And I also want to mention my favorite program, if you're allowed to have a favorite. I don't know, but I learned during this on the EcoPeace program, which is focused on the Jordan Valley, and where we are working since 15 years now together with Israel, Palestine, and Jordan to alleviate the scarcity of water, other problems that are specific for this part of the Arab region. In conclusion, I like to say that I think we all agree that the problems we are facing are transboundary in nature, and therefore the solutions also needs to be transboundary. And I think there is a few key elements or lessons learned that we have from this when it comes to the need for partnerships, which I already mentioned. I think this is very obvious. it's very obvious also that we need an integrated approach, not least with the civil society and other actors and groups that are affected of the things we are working on, and we need increased regional cooperation in this part of the world. And Sweden, we continue to stand ready to support this. We have a regional program, a new one since 1 year ago, which builds on these exact elements. And we are looking forward to working with our partners on this for the coming years. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I think from our perspective, the World Food Programme, what we're seeing in this COP is that food system, agriculture, and the link to climate crisis is really coming up strongly. I think we have at least 3 to 4 pavilions that are covering that topic. So hopefully we will see something also in terms of the outcome, but that remains to be seen. Thanks also for bringing up Yemen. Yemen, of course, is a country where just since July, I think over 300,000 people affected by floods. So they're hit by a triple whammy of, conflict, the climate crisis, and also the economic crisis. So very important to keep some of the more fragile countries in mind. Later in the panel discussion, we will actually have a private sector representative from Yemen. So I hope you get to hear some of their reflections on this situation. Now, moving on to the next opening remark, Mr. Kishan Kudey from UNDP, Regional Team Lead for Energy, Nature and Climate. Kishan and I, we worked together for many years now. I think some of the first words in the regional project that was launched was written jointly with Kishan. I also want to recognize Arab Water Council Secretary General Dr. Hussein, who also was part of the very, very beginning of that joint effort. So, Kishan, maybe you can share UNDP's perspective on this. It would be great to hear a little bit about where we're at in this region in terms of the financial gap to really meet this climate crisis also. So, word is yours.
Thanks, Oscar. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Great audience online in particular, as we're live streamed on YouTube. So, greetings to everyone that's with us. Thank you indeed, Mr. Ambassador, for joining us and for the kind remarks, and also for the kind contributions to UNDP's climate programming globally, not least in this region, and in fact in our country programming on the climate agenda. So as the Secretary General has said, we're in a climate emergency, beyond doubt, and this region is a perfect example of that. We've seen trends over the last decade plus. I think the period from 2007 till 2017 is seen by many experts as the worst drought cycle in maybe 1,000 years, just to give a sense of context. Not a bad year, not a bad few years, maybe a bad millennium. It's beyond once in 100 now. So it's really strained the region, I should say, in terms of social vulnerability, fragility. It's been a contributor and exacerbator, rural to urban displacement over the last decade. An exacerbating force in some onsets of grievances and conflicts, of course. So it's definitely climate change as an issue of crisis prevention and recovery, you can say, in this region. So a few years ago, after the launch of the Paris Agreement, a bunch of agencies, together with our partners in CETA, regional bodies such as LAS, WFP, the UN's largest humanitarian agency, UNDP, the UN's largest implementer of grant assistance for climate change, the UN Environment Program, UN Disaster Risk Reduction Agency, and UN Habitat, the city agency, urban agency, came together and said, what is really the profile for climate action in this region specifically? It's quite a unique profile. And to bring that forward, climate action to address issues of vulnerability, crisis prevention, recovery. So in many ways, the initiative that we launched, which is called the SDG Climate Initiative, is this multi-partner facility, a platform for actually advancing climate action in a way that addresses this kind of vulnerabilities across the region. And specifically how climate action can help address co-benefits across the SDGs. SDG 1 on poverty, 2 on food, 6 on water. and various others, women's empowerment, inequalities, displacement. And so this very unique partnership came about that has advanced quite well, and congrats to everybody involved, particularly in bringing local results. So in terms of the NDCs, which we've had a pleasure of helping develop and enhance across the region the last couple of years, about $600 billion of new investments are foreseen in the NDCs in the Arab region from now to 2030. But more importantly, perhaps, is the enhancement process to really highlight the ways that climate action is linked to situations of fragility on the climate adaptation side of things. And that's really been sharp in these NDCs across the region, whether it's the NDC in Iraq or Yemen, Sudan or Somalia, and other parts of the region. And so that's really an important level of ambition, raised ambition, and request for assistance, let's say, to help achieve this goal of scaled up climate action in this region, in these unique contexts. So a number of great success stories and results that are going to come about during the next hour and a half from the local action grants that have been supported by all partners that are here today in places like Yemen and Iraq in particular, in Palestine and in Jordan, in Egypt and in Tunisia and elsewhere, that really are great examples of integrated solutions, of how you can take climate action in a way that brings strong social dividends, addresses issues of crisis, not just prevention, but actually how do you take mainstream green solutions into recovery processes, right? So this green recovery agenda, which is still such an important topic in this region. I think I'll stop there, but I just wanted to say thanks again to our partners at Sweden, our other partner agencies, UN agencies, and everybody. And personally, really looking forward to a great discussion today. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Kishan. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. So now we will move into the presentation. So maybe if I could invite Dr. Jean de Cuna from UN Women to the scene, and then also Dr. Amal Assad from the Arab Water Council. And we will enjoy their presentation for about 7 to 10 minutes. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask that immediately after. So, Dr. Amal, the floor is yours, I believe. And I just want to check, can you in the back actually hear okay? Is the sound coming through? Okay, very good. All right.
Okay,
Dr.
thank
Amal.
you very much, Oscar. Your Excellency, distinguished guests, it's a pleasure to be with you here. And today, me and my colleague, Dr. Jean, we are trying to show you some of the successful examples of joint collaboration between different partners under the SDG Climate Facility project, which is one of the major successful efforts supported by the Swedish government through SIDA. We have two parts of this presentation. The first part will deal with the social vulnerability in the Arab region, and the second part will focus on gender equity and migration. I will just move forward to save time. When we started the collaboration under the Climate Facility project, the main target was to ensure climate security in the Arab region, and through climate security we ensure human security. We defined a new term, which is the climate security, and here we wanted to have a big umbrella that does not only focus on climate impacts on water problems, but also to tackle social aspects, to tackle economic aspects, gender, peace in the region. So this is the umbrella we have been working under. And as we all know that climate impacts is actually increasing the threats that we are facing and the challenges that we are facing in our region. So it is putting more burden on the increased population growth, on the decrease in food security, water scarcity and stress, gender inequity, social vulnerability, and many others. The project, as Oscar mentioned, is a collaboration to focus on human security in the region, and where we can ensure the implementation and the integration between the three agendas, the Sendai framework and the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. Under this project, we have a lot of partners who have been collaborating since 2019, and we have done a lot of studies. All partners were contributing, and today we are going to show you a collaboration between the AWC and the UN Women. And our activity was under outcome 2 of this project, where we focus on the analysis, tools, and strategies. Now I'm going to take you into a journey that we started by focusing on social vulnerability in the Arab region and what we did. We saw that climate change and social vulnerability is an important aspect to be linked together. So we have in the Arab region a lot of countries that are suffering from water scarcity. Some groups are more vulnerable to climate change than others, and there are pre-existing social issues and structural inequalities that contribute to social vulnerability and to climate change. The lack of understanding of the complex interrelationships between climate change and social vulnerability needed to be tackled in the region, and the climate risk assessment, often based on a limited number of indicators. And we wanted to show what are the real indicators that we need to include in our studies, so we are really focusing on people on the ground and how to support them when they are vulnerable to different climate impacts. And of course, multi-sectoral approaches are needed to reach policy making. So this is the reason we started this study. I have to thank a team who have been behind this study, my colleague Dr. Tina Yakovsky, and a big team from WFP who was our main partner in this study, and a lot of support from the UNDP regional office and other colleagues. The study focused on climate change impact and social vulnerability, where we used compound indicators to assess drought impact on social vulnerability in the agriculture and agro-pastoral sectors in Jordan. As I told you, we selected Jordan because it's one of the most countries suffering from water scarcity, especially the prone areas where the droughts are really hitting. And the study had many objectives, and the main target was to analyze the social vulnerability indicators under the climate change and to develop risk maps where are the prone areas in the country and how we can deal with the problems. Very briefly, the idea was that climate risk assessment with a focus on social vulnerability was tackled as the main topic, and we wanted to expand the social indicators with the more complex indicators that were used. We actually developed this study focusing on vulnerability, and the hazard that was selected as a climate risk, as a climate impact was the drought. And at the end, we succeeded to develop risk maps of the most prone areas in Jordan. And we had actually this, I will try to take you very briefly because this is a very long study, and I invite you to see the final report online. Very briefly, exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity led us to develop at the end, and of course including the hazard, I will be very short, we developed the risk map for the Jordan country, and actually we had another detailed study in one of the communities. So this was the first development, having a risk map, social vulnerability risk map in Jordan. And then we had a case study where we worked with people. We wanted to work with people on the ground. We wanted to have field work where we can really know what are the main problems, so we can develop at the end, and our target is to have a similar map for the rest of the whole country, not only this one specific region or study area that we tackled. This is some of the results that the study is very huge, but this is some of the results where we see that one of the social aspects there is the limited access to education. Of course, limited access to water was a key issue because this is a drought region. People were suffering from drought, from less water to be able to go for agriculture and also livestock raising. But one of the other items that we want to tackle, limited job opportunities, and having this region on the edges between, or on the front line between Syria and Jordan, is putting more stress on the water resources and natural resources in this region. We had many discussions and interviews with the people in this region. Just one of the things that I would like to share with you, that people say we used to farm but not anymore. We had livestock and we sold all because are useless without rain. People are suffering in this region, and this is only one example in Jordan. There are many other examples that we hope to tackle in the extension of this study. I will finish here by some recommendations and conclusions that climate change has to be understood as compound risk and as multiplier of a variety of existing risks and vulnerabilities. Expanding the list of social indicators helps to include multiple dimensions of social vulnerability. Mapping results at national level confirm the results of other drought studies, and here we confirm the study of UNDP that was conducted in 2019, and we extended the work further with more indicators that are really showing the vulnerability in this region. Also, social research and case studies on the ground are important to build evidence when we want to have risk assessment and development of policies. And of course, integrated multi-sectoral and multi-scalar research tools are needed to generate evidence-based research that can support policy development. Finally, I would like to mention that this study was a starting point. We already developed a second phase that we hope to work for, and we can complete the work done in Jordan by also moving to other countries and selecting other countries that are facing climate impacts, whether it is drought or floods, and also having the detailed studies on social vulnerability, because at the end, people want to have solutions. And this is the start of our next study, to try to develop solutions on the ground. We had dialogues with the people in the village, Deir el-Kahf, and from them we got solutions. They already proposed solutions, and we were very happy to have a dialogue with the government of Jordan, represented by the Ministry of Water Resources and the Ministry of Social Development, and also NGOs and civil society were there, trying to discuss possible solutions to such case study and other cases that are in Jordan. I will stop here. I'm very sorry I talk a lot. Thank you, Oscar. And I will take you to the other very interesting part of the work done, and I invite Dr. Jean to take the lead. Thank you.
So, thanks so much, Amal. The second part is basically based on a piece of research that we've done with the Arab Water Council on climate change, gender and mobility in Jordan and other parts of the Arab region. So to begin with, without too much of ado, because there's lots of landscape and context given, women constitute about 60% of the climate-sensitive agricultural workforce in the MENA region. And in their traditional roles as nurturers, as small-scale, low-emissions subsistence farmers, as small-scale livestock raisers, as gatherers and providers of food and water, as natural resource managers, as consumers of less emission-intensive goods and services, they contribute less to greenhouse gas emissions than men, but they are located at the lower ends of agriculture and other value chains, and this diminishes their climate resilience. So a few examples. In Yemen, where women do 60% of the farm labor, 90% of livestock rearing, 10% of wage labor, but own only 1% of the land and earn 50% less than men for comparable work. In the tropical storm of 2008, their even more meager economic assets and food stocks were wiped out, and in poverty rates that spiked by about 40%. In the hardest hit governorates, women were more starkly impacted. In Jordan, for instance, extreme aridity and water scarcity, women contribute hugely to agriculture. They are often informal sector workers working without payment on family-owned farms or wages on huge commercial farms or kitchen gardening and homestead agriculture. They have the least access to irrigation water. Their crops are failing, declining productivity with respect to barley, wheat. Their fruits and vegetables take in a lot of water. So there's a lot of income loss, there's a lot of nutrition loss, and they have to depend on diverse livelihoods. Workloads increase for women because they have to nurse family members because of waterborne diseases, heat waves, drought-related diseases. They're walking longer distance to collect food, fuel, water, also compromised on the way with sexual and gender-based violence. Poor access to water and food relief, particularly affecting female-headed households or women with disabilities, older women, because of a lack of women-friendly distribution systems or disability-friendly infrastructure, or negative food coping mechanisms, and therefore this enhances their health conditions, poor health conditions, already poor health conditions. Where there's no water or there's unclean water, it diminishes hygienic practices, and this increases vulnerability to sexual and reproductive health diseases. It poses risks to maternal mortality, and they have poor access to health facilities. Widespread violence because of decreased resources within the families, because of sexual extortion, sexual bribery, and we also came across instances of theft and violence against women, taking away, appropriating their relief items where they couldn't defend themselves, and large-scale marginalization from decision-making. Now, the World Bank estimates that 10 to 20% of current migration flows in the region, including rural-urban migration, are determined by climatic conditions, and this is going to increase. The nature of hazards and socio-cultural conditions determine migration trajectories. So whether it's internal, external, or short-term, long-term, or whether women move with families, or they stay behind, or they move independently, is all determined by this. Now, in the Arab region, in Syria, for instance, because of protracted drought, large numbers emptied their villages, men and women, and moved to cities like the outskirts of Damascus. Women moved independently as vegetable packers to western Syria, cities in western Syria. Men moved as agricultural workers and construction workers to Jordan and Lebanon. In Jordan, for instance, there's huge rural to urban migration. There is a huge influx of refugees and migrants from neighboring countries into Jordan, and 91% of the population lives in its cities. So tremendous stress on host country resources or host site resources, and in Jordan, tensions developing between migrants and local populations. And in all of this, women are disproportionately impacted in terms of access to services. Now, stay behind women hold up the rural economy, the household economy, but they are in very precarious situations when remittances are not forthcoming from men or are not regularly forthcoming from men. But I don't want to paint women just as victims. They bring their local knowledge, their skills, their leadership attributes, their networks to bear on frontline response and on long-term recovery. They are engaged in climate mitigation, climate adaptation activities, building ecosystem diversity and preserving it, improved soil, water, energy management practices, and we have a catalogue of good practices, too short a time to share. But what do we do about this? So my last concluding point, within the sustainable development framework, and adopting a whole of government, a whole of society approach, and adopting a nexus approach across these policy fields and placing women at the center of decision making, we really need to generate data and analysis disaggregated by sex and other variables to address the food, water, and other priorities of women across these agendas, different categories of women. And we're doing work with the Arab Water Council, research work, and that's going to progress further. Second, we need to capacitate governments and civil society to mainstream the priorities of different categories of women into the design, the implementation, the monitoring, evaluation of climate, DRR, migration strategies, policies, and programs backed by strong targets, indicators, and budgets. Now, Jordan, in our research, is a front runner on gender mainstreaming in climate policies, but it needs to adopt an intersectional approach to gender equality and women's rights and a nexus approach across these policy fields. Thirdly, we need to build and ensure women's leadership at all levels in these climate mechanisms, disaster mechanisms, migration mechanisms. We need to have women at the helm of governance structures in climate financing. We need gender benchmarks, not just in multilateral climate financing mechanisms, but across climate financing as a whole. And lastly, we need to invest sustainable climate finance in large-scale, women-led climate adaptation, climate mitigation initiatives that include or address the priorities of different groups of women across these policy fields in an integrated manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jean. Now, while the audience maybe think of some questions, maybe I can just quickly ask, in your view, in this COP, 2 days ago we had the Gender Day, what is your reflection? Are we seeing a stronger momentum towards, gender transformation, integrating gender considerations properly into the climate action?
Well, we have a very long way to go, but there are huge opportunities. There was Gender Day, there's a momentum. There are 2 COPs in this region. They're talking about damage and loss to women as well. They're talking about, we have the Lima Action Plan on gender that needs to be picked up. So there's huge opportunity, but I do believe that we need to move from rhetoric to action very, very fast in terms of concrete, long-term policies, programs on the ground, and increase climate financing to women, particularly women from the South. that portion of finance is very little. It doesn't go to infrastructure, it doesn't go to energy. So these are things that need to be addressed.
So more work to be done. I'm looking if there's any immediate questions from the presentations that were made. If not, let's shift to the panelists to come on. And what I would suggest, because I need it myself, is if everybody just stand up for a little bit, shake, your legs and your heads and your arms, because I also recognize that maybe after a while those seating areas are not so comfortable. So if I could ask the panelists to please come up after having moved a bit, and then we can start the discussion. And what I would ask is that as I introduce the panelists, maybe if you can just raise your hand so that the audience can recognize a bit who is who. So everybody is to my right, but to my right, Franz Schappendonk from CGIR, a climate security specialist. Welcome. We also have Ruth Matthews, Senior Manager from CIWI. Welcome. We have Kaushik Barua, Advisor at UNDP. Welcome. We have Samer Abeljaber from Palestine, WFP Country Director. And last but not least, Arsak Al-Najjar from Yemen, CEO Mocha Valley. So thank you very much for coming here. So maybe starting with you, Franz, we've heard a lot about the region. You do a lot of work also on how climate change is exacerbating the challenges facing food and water. Could you maybe tell us a little bit, what are the links between these, and what are we witnessing from CGIR perspective when it comes to the climate, the food and the water crisis?
Great, thank you, Oscar. So at the risk of maybe repeating some of the things we've heard previously, I'll just begin by very quickly outlining a few of the key kind of hydrological and food production trends that we have currently in the region and where it's going in the future. So water scarcity is amongst the highest in the world, as we're all aware. The average available water is less than 1,000 cubic meters per capita, and it sits right on the water poverty line. And whilst there is significant intra-regional variability in this, the region as a whole faces very much declining per capita water availability, and it's expected to become much more arid in the years to come. So most areas currently receive less than 300 millimeters of annual rainfall, and also 2/3 of countries across the region are currently using groundwater at rates exceeding recharge, and this is still in the context of the evolving climate crises. Yet at the same time, demand for water is also increasing substantially due to some of the factors we've heard previously. So we've heard population growth, urbanization, both of which increase the demand for food as well, and then obviously a commensurate expansion of irrigation and food production systems. So I think, first of all, recognize the interconnectivity of those two areas is of critical importance, particularly for this region, as the vast majority, so around 80% to 85% of total water consumption actually goes towards the agricultural sector. So decreasing precipitation rates, creeping aridity and desertification, and soil degradation also due to years of overuse and overproduction, they're all therefore very much likely to continue to undermine the conditions for agricultural activity in many areas across the region. Coming to your question, I think the knock-on effects of this are quite alarming, because agriculture supports on average around about 1/3 of the region's population, although there are significant inter-country variations regarding this. I also just think it's worth highlighting, maybe briefly to step outside the boundaries of the question, also bringing energy into this discussion, which is also an area that's very interwoven with both food and water security. Again, significant inter-country variability, but there is a significant amount of energy produced in some countries that goes towards water pumping, water treatment, meaning that energy production also needs to be a part of the conversation here, I think. So the scale of the challenge is vast, as I'm sure we're all aware. And due to those critical interconnections, the solutions will need to be developed and implemented by a range of different actors. So scientists like are present at the CGR, but also policymakers, local communities, the private sector, as we'll hear from soon, and ranging from the local all the way through to the regional and the global. But one of those people who I should have maybe named in that list of stakeholders was also peace and security actors and peace-building actors, because we can't ignore how those challenges intersect with and represent significant threats to regional peace and security. we're increasingly seeing in this region, but also elsewhere, how conventional hard security challenges such as insurgency or terrorism are becoming conflated with human security challenges, so softer challenges, threats to livelihoods, health, and food and nutritional security. So as we've heard from the previous presenters, the climate change-related impacts throughout the region are therefore likely to exacerbate and multiply already existing insecurities, inequalities, and drivers of conflict. And we can expect to see that climate factors become much more embedded into subnational, national, and regional conflict systems as a result. So there's just a few kind of key climate fragility mechanisms I think that I want to emphasize before I stop talking. So these include increasing intercommunal competition, conflict over scarce resources such as water in particular, and these are especially likely to escalate into violence in the absence of effective governance, the absence of conflict resolution mechanisms, also the inability of a state to provide physical security, which is the case in many contexts. We're also seeing more threats, both climatic and non-climatic, to the availability and provision of food. As we heard the ambassador say, it's a very import-dependent region, and food provision is in many cases also a key social protection function of governments, a key legitimizer, and the link between food price spikes, social unrest is very clear. That's very well evidenced globally. We're also seeing more human mobility, as we heard, particularly from rural to urban areas, and we shouldn't over-securitize migration, obviously. It's a very critical adaptation of a development strategy, but there are risks attached to it. We briefly heard in the case of Jordan there that migrant communities can face insecurity in those urban areas. They can create tension between different social groups, but it also puts a strain on state-society relations and the inability to provide those public goods. And also then finally, we can't ignore the cross-border dimension of how climate may impact management and usage of transboundary water resources at the interstate level, which is an opportunity but also a risk, and it's likely going to inch its way up the geopolitical priority agenda of many countries in the region. Also just finally to highlight, there's still need for concrete and context-specific evidence on how these mechanisms may emerge in different contexts for sure, and also how to mitigate these potential risks, and this is something that obviously we at CGR are quite heavily geared towards working on. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Franz. And I think, in this region, if we look back a little bit, and I'm going to go off script now. Yes, sorry, if we can all move a little bit so the plant doesn't attack, that would be great. Okay, very good. So let me go a little bit off script here, Franz, and ask you, because I think in this region, if we look, for the last 10 years or so, climate change has not necessarily been on the top of the agenda, for good reasons many times. But that is changing a little bit now. And I think part of that change is perhaps because we are thinking about climate change in a different way. And that's where this concept of, let's say, climate security is coming in. So I'm just wondering, because I think we're going to hear this terminology more and more as we move forward. So could you maybe just help frame the climate security thinking very briefly for us and the audience? I think that would be helpful. So what do we mean when we say climate security?
Yeah, sure. I'll try my best. So the kind of common terminology, the way we talk about it is as climate as a risk or threat multiplier. So it's very much an exacerbator of already existing insecurities and tensions, and more often like kind of structural conflict drivers that may already exist. We also often say that the climate conflict interface is incredibly complex. It involves lots of different dimensions that you can't really separate out of each other. It's a very emergent nexus. So if we talk about the presence of conflict, we also have to talk about the presence of natural resources. We have to talk about water. We have to talk about food production and how all that intersects with human security, essentially. So kind of, I think, the key lens that we go through. So I think one of the key maybe kind of methodological things also is this idea of risk pathways, which is maybe a bit disingenuous because they are quite linear in their nature. But I do think they're quite a useful thought exercise a little bit to kind of see how climate change impacts through a variety of intermediary factors that either increase or decrease the likelihood of conflict can lead to instability and conflict. I hope that is in some way useful. No, thank you. And I think the causality between climate and conflict, whether that is a causality actually is something that is very difficult to find evidence directly of. Of course, we know the multiplier effect and so on, but thank you very much for that. So I want to go to Palestine next. Summer, of course, Palestine is a very, very specific context where WFP is providing both humanitarian assistance and development assistance. And I want to ask you a question, but maybe before that, if we can just load the video, because I know you wanted to show a video about what is WFP's
support in Palestine. So if we can see that, and then we can continue to the question.
زراعة خضروات الزهرة والباذنجان والكوسة والملوخية وكل أنواع الفلفل كثير استفدت منه لتحسين مستواي الاجتماعي وتشغيل الأيدي العاملة اللي هم أولادي. طبعا دخل إلنا واكتفاء ذاتي إلنا للبيت.
ربنا قوانا وضلينا محافظين على المحصول وبنتفاجئ بعد 10 أيام إنه بلش إنه المحصول يعطينا، والحمد لله بعدين بتفاجئ إنه كانت الحبة ما شاء الله عليها لما نقطفها تقعد 10 أيام من غير ثلاجة برا ولا حبة خير. الكل صار يحب ياخذ منها حفاظا على صحته.
So a short video, but I think quite powerful in demonstrating a little bit what the WFP is doing in Palestine. So Samra, maybe you can expand a bit how we are engaging with communities and the government to support climate action, and how well are we actually able to link food security, climate, and the humanitarian context in Palestine?
Thanks, Oscar. I think it's important to just start that the food insecurity in Palestine is mainly driven by poverty and unemployment. If we want to go into unemployment rates, it's around 50% of the population, mainly in Gaza. And 60% of those unemployed are among the youth. 65% are women. So the figures are very alarming, while the literacy rate is really high, 99%. So I've been there for a year and a half, and when I started seeing that there is opportunities in actually enabling youth into certain, or even women, in certain activities that would graduate them from food assistance or from the social protection assistance. So what we're doing in WFP in Palestine, we're providing assistance using debit cards. This is the card that we're going. Almost 1 million people are receiving the assistance, 600,000 cash out, and 400,000 go to WFP contracted shops. And I'll get back to the shops in a minute. So because of this platform, we were able to digitize all the information about the household level. So we started mapping, okay, who are the potential families who have daughters or sons that can be trained with certain skills, or give them some sort of agriculture project that they can support themselves. So that was mainly our targeting approach. The projects go from greenhouses, livestock fodder units, because many of the herders, the biggest obstacle for them is the debt that they consume from buying fodder for their livestock. The beekeeping, like you saw on the video, fishermen in Gaza. We started working on fishermen and providing them trainings how to rehabilitate their boats in Gaza, which was not easy, but then we had to work with the Israeli authorities to allow certain materials to go in for those fishermen. We started working on solar energy to support getting water out of wells, water pumps. And of course, this whole thing allowed us to help women start up cooperatives. So if even a lady is growing cucumber, for example, we help them how to train them how to pack it after they make it as a pickle. And the shops that WFP is contracting for the voucher program, around 300 in West Bank and Gaza, we started advocating that they become their venues where those women that are part of our livelihood projects can actually market their products. So that allowed their income generating activities to improve, and at the same time we started seeing that even the money that they're making out of their businesses, more or less 35% of that expenditure that they're spending on is going actually back into the food, the local dairy production and others, which is needed for them at the household level. The other thing, all those projects I mentioned, when we looked at it, the design was actually to improve the food consumption. That was the real driver for us. But then we started seeing that there are other elements that were not part of the design, but then later on we started building on it. So we were giving greenhouse, for example, projects to institutions. And there's an institution in Beit Lahem city where it's for women who are victims of gender-based violence. And the idea was that they would source tomatoes and cucumbers into the kitchen so that they can eat healthy food. But then we realized that that greenhouse turned out to be a safe space for the women who are actually residing in that center. And even for the workers, they started taking their cup of tea and go into the greenhouse because it's, they can kind of switch off. And then after some time, almost 4 months, they started introducing gardening as one of the mental health programs for the ladies that are there. It was not part of the design, but I think it was really important so that when they're graduating, we can link them to bigger value chains, especially like the projects EcoPeace is working on, because the first visit for the General Counsel Julius, when he joined, we were together with EcoPeace. Very impressive. We started also looking at water and land scarcity and degradation. There is an issue, and access to the land is a serious issue, especially in the West Bank Area C areas. But we saw that people tend to, or kids tend to be forced by their parents to be doctors or engineers, and still they are unemployed. They're not able to find jobs. So we agreed with the Ministry of Agriculture to pilot a nutrition summer camp with the private sector, the government, and the UN, to advocate among kids in the summer break about the importance of a nutrition diet. Then what we did was piloting 3 schools in West Bank and 3 schools in Gaza, where we equipped them with greenhouses. We started working with the students basically about the importance of agriculture, introducing technologies to make it interesting for the kids, because farmers today are not like farmers 50 years ago. And we want to really bring them back into the importance of farming. Sensors are related to humidity, temperatures, automating the systems related to the irrigation systems, and bringing even the women that we supported through the cooperatives to use those greenhouses at the schools as a venue for basically providing advocacy messaging about the importance of nutritious food. Last but not least, if you allow me, what we did, which I thought was really interesting, my background is information technology, so I really believe in this area. And we found that our funding usually is linked to the sustainability of the projects. So whenever WFP funding stops, the project more or less fails because there is no continuity with it. And that's why the link with the shops and the ladies is a one-to-one relationship. So even if WFP is out of that loop, they still continue. But even within those people, it's around 700 projects that we're doing at the moment in West Bank and Gaza. We made sure that the fancy word is social networking, but in reality it's WhatsApp groups that we created, linking all those people that are depending on the type of projects, and bringing volunteers who are subject matter experts in agriculture, in livestock, so that they can actually communicate with each other. And the peer-to-peer support from those, let's say, individuals has become really an interesting motivator for them to really showcase what they're doing. Even if someone take a picture of a leaf that is not healthy, you have many people contributing how maybe it's too much water, make sure you add this, etc. So we created this community of practice that is really powerful at the community level.
Thank you very much, Samar. Super interesting, from training to greenhouses to the value chain and the peer-to-peer support and all the additional benefits generated. You touched quite a lot on youth, and in the Arab region, 50% of the population under the age of 25. So I'm just wondering if I can follow up really quickly. Like, what are youth really saying in Palestine? Do they feel part of the climate solution? Are they picked up? Because we know it's a challenge, because not always do youth want to be farmers even or engage. So how do we kind of bring them in? What's your views?
Don't quote me for what I'm gonna say, but
Tulkarem, I believe. We're also working with the private sector to actually develop decentralized energy solutions again. But with these, as you know, energy is at the center of the food, water, energy nexus. So a lot of this is going towards agriculture and towards water management. So there we have seen that involving the private sector means that we get very scaled up co-financing. For about $200,000 of our financing, we've seen $2.5 million of co-financing from the private sector. So we do integrated programming by making sure that we cover all kinds of risk. We try and do private sector sort of integration or private sector promotion. And the third approach we've seen in the climate facility grants is gender mainstreaming. You know, Jean spoke extensively about that. I mean, I won't go into the details, but we all know that, you know, all incentives and opportunities are structured in gendered terms in the whole world. I mean, not just in this region. So we want to make sure that that's upfront in our thinking, and we're doing that in the Iraq project in the marshlands. So in brief, these are some of the barriers we're trying to address. Let me end there, and maybe we can do more discussions with that as well.
Thank you very much. I think we have one mic that is not working here for later. No, thank you very much for bringing up examples and models from the region. Thank you for talking about incentives. I really do believe that we need to address, the risk appetite in the region if we want to move ahead. Turning to the private sector, I'm super excited to hear from Arsak and Yemen. Because I think that there is more and more expectation, actually, on the private sector to be fully engaged and integrated as part of the solution. So I'm very, very excited to hear, your perspective from Yemen. What are the type of activities that you're doing to address water scarcity in Yemen in particular? And I'm going to come over and give the mic.
Thank you. First of all, I hope that everyone can hear my voice and it's not that a low voice. This is first. Second, I'd like just to say a small information about Muka Valley as a private sector player in Yemen. We are specialized in conducting coffee studies and quality assurance. So that means we work directly with farmers and also with traders and international companies and with those who are interested with Yemeni coffee. So in terms of water scarcity, it's not just an important topic, actually it's the main topic. Why is that? If there is no water, there is no coffee tree, So what are we trying to do with the farmers in order to solve this problem? We're trying to speed the solution, which is the integrated coffee farm management. What's this exactly? Integrated coffee management is a broad topic. Within it, there is irrigation management. As you know, Yemen is one of the countries which suffer from drought or the water scarcity. So at the same time, we have flood or seasonal floods. How can we manage that? We have floods and in other months we have drought. Yemeni people or the old Yemeni people, they used to do management in that. They used to do dams, they used to do water harvesting tanks in order to harvest the water from the floods and also from the rains, in order to have water for the drought days. So now we try to build some water tanks with the farmers, but not that for the long life. Why? Because that is a little bit costly. So we try to give or to come up with a new alternative, which is the water harvesting tanks, which stays for 5 to 7 years. Till that day, farmers going to be able to enlarge their coffee lands and to have more profits, and at the same time to have enough water for their coffee trees in order not to die, So this is in general. Besides that, how can coffee farmers try to overlap have that problem to have another source of income for having another crops beside the coffee, as coffee is only one harvesting season in a year. So this is in brief what we are doing in water scarcity. How can we come up with new solutions to solve this problem? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hope that we can discuss a little bit more on what's happening in Yemen with the private sector. But I want to go back to Palestine now and hear your reflections, Samer, on what can be scaled up and how do you see private sector actually enter into that picture? Because if we want to have economic sustainability, we will need the private sector involved. So maybe you have some reflections on that.
Thank you, Oscar. Maybe two things. I'll give you another example of something that is practical and happening there. Anything that gets into Gaza needs to be put on wooden pallets. My first basically document that I had to sign last year when I went into Palestine was to sell the wood instead of keeping it in our warehouse because the food is distributed, to sell it to the private sector. So I kept it in the warehouse and I told my team, let's think out of the box what we can do with it. So we ended up working with almost 20 carpentry shops to recycle that wood and train girls and boys from the families that we're supporting how to make furniture out of this wooden pallets. 30 girls were graduated. It was a 2-month program, and the boys, most of them, they went into the labor market because that carpentry shops was able to take them. But then the discussion with the shops was they could not take them because they didn't have toilets, for example, for girls or women. But what was really interesting in that program, that we were challenging the social norms. So in the first 2 weeks of the program, the parents were against their girls going to the carpentry shops. So we redesigned the program to say, you know what, join them. We will give you transportation, we'll give you a meal. 2 weeks later, they trusted the program and they actually allowed the girls to continue, and the parents came to the graduations. The concept I like to work on, and there is something that, it's not because you're here, but I have to say it, the second Secretary General is actually a Swedish diplomat, Dag, his name was. And he said something that I think was very much relevant after the World War II in 1954, which I think is more relevant now than then. He said the UN was not created to take was not created to take mankind to heaven. It was created to save mankind from hell. And I think climate change is a real risk that we need to work with the private sector, like the carpentry or any other value chain in the field that we're working in, as well as with academia, as well as within the UN community and research centers. We need to come together to really make impact. And in some contexts, you can take things to scale. In the context where I'm coming from, Palestine, you really can't take things to scale because of the ongoing blockades and other things. So we're trying to take small examples at local context level and see how we can replicate it. But most of the time, it's redesigning new things to actually adapt to the local context.
Thank you very much, Samer. And indeed, Palestine is a very specific conflict, but at the same time very important. Now, I want to get back to the private sector in Yemen, Arsak, if that's okay. And coming from a WFP perspective, perhaps, I think one anxiety that we have when we engage with private sector is how do we ensure that the communities that we work with actually benefit? How do we ensure that there's ownership, integration? So I'm wondering, from a private sector perspective, how do you tackle that question of, working with local communities, ensuring that, it's their needs that they're meeting, but of course from them the private sector perspective. And I'm going to come with the mic again.
Thank you. Actually, the play of giving and taking the mic, kind of having some activity. Okay, regarding how can we ensure as a private sector working with the local communities and to let them be more engaged. Currently we have a project with UNDP which is Get for Coffee for climate resilience. This pilot project, we're trying as much as we can to apply the integrated coffee farm management with the
Take the desk down. It's got nothing to do with me, that.
Everybody okay, I hope?
Thank you, sorry. It's got nothing. It's the levels in there. Yeah. No, yeah.
Hey, hello, hello. Hey, hey, hey. Hey, hey, hey. Hey, hey, hello. Hey, hey, hello. Hey.
Hello? Okay. As I was saying, first of all, we need to give them what's really needed as a water to be available, and at the same time to market their coffee. So these two factors, once we're going to be able to do the irrigation management, including the water harvesting tanks, and at the same time by giving them some technical support in order to be able to elevate the quality for their crops, specifically the coffee. After that, we're going to be able to have a high quality coffee and also to ensure a good market for them. So only by these two factors, we're going to be able to attract the local communities represented by the farmers to be able to continue and to have the inner intention to continue working with the coffee. So this is very important. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much. I'm glad that the sound is working, so I didn't have to scream at least. Now, Ruth, I want to go back to you perhaps and just hear if you could summarize in 3 recommendations, how do we accelerate the way that we're tackling the water crisis in the region? What are your top 3 recommendations?
So I think the first thing is to recognize that water is in the center of the climate crisis and the food security crisis, and so we really need to make it a focus of activity and to do that in a way that brings together the coalitions of actors that are necessary to make the changes that are required and to come to that cooperative agreements and shared accountability for taking action. So I think that's one of them. I think another one, I didn't get much chance to say it, and it's unfortunate that the Swedish ambassador has left now because it fits into our government's, I live in Sweden now, our government's new agenda is to really look at the way that we use water and think about it from the perspective of how are we using it on behalf of the environment, how are we using it on behalf of the economy, and how are we using it on behalf of people and equitable sharing of the resource. If we really look at those 3 elements from this perspective of water demand and water demand management, as well as considerations of how we can use nature as an ally in our water management, I think that also can help us unlock some opportunities that currently might might not be seen. And these types of opportunities are ones that can benefit the most vulnerable, because the most vulnerable are frequently the ones that are most reliant on ecosystem services for the needs that they have, whether it's food or water or other types of life-giving life-giving sources. So we really need to make sure that we're creating a mosaic of actions that work together for the environment, for the economy, and for people. Then the third one that I would recommend is that that we need to recognize that we live within one water cycle. We all participate in that one water cycle. And so there is not your water and my water. There is only our water. And everything that we do in relationship to how we use water, how we act on the landscape, whether it's through agriculture, industry, or through households, how we emit greenhouse gas emissions, how we grow our food, how we do this in a way that strengthens the water cycle, gives it an opportunity to be available to us as we need it to be. I think that's going to really change the dynamics of conflict around whose water is it. It's no one's water, it's one water cycle. It goes, from the sky through the river basins into the ocean and back into the sky. And so we really need to work together for the benefit of that one water cycle.
Thank you very much, Ruth. So I heard we need to recognize it as a critical resource. We need to understand how we use it. We need to collaborate around it and understand that it's almost like a water cycle, shared water resource. And if we have those perspectives, we can accelerate action. So thanks a lot for that. Franz, I want to, not France, I guess is a bit, otherwise it's a country. I want to turn to you, and I know that CGIAR has been doing some research in the region which looks at how well is, let's say, climate, water, food integrated into, conflict perspective. Are we able to really bring that together in our recovery plans, in our peace plans, and so on, which is, of course, quite relevant to this region because many countries are affected by conflict. So maybe you can tell us a little bit, what are you finding here? How is that policy interface happening?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to very quickly say that this project is also part of the SDG Climate Facility, a research component of it. A key component of the project was indeed to assess the extent to which climate-related security risks are taken into account into key kind of high-level policy outputs at the national level. So food security strategies, development strategies, disaster risk reduction, a variety of other sectors that are kind of deemed to be relevant to the climate security nexus. And we basically found that climate security as a topic is not really that present in these high-level policy documents. There's also not really a lot of evidence of context-specific understandings of how climate may result in instability or conflict, particularly along the lines of those risks I outlined in my previous answer. So these concerns are really largely absent from the challenge statements, problem definitions. And this also means that examples of integrated climate action programming that really brings together and embeds these kind of peace and conflict prevention issues into baseline context assessments, program design, objective setting, are also kind of largely absent. But we also found that there was some evidence to suggest as well that there is scope for the improved integration of these issues into existing programming, particularly for the water and agricultural sectors. There's already many types of projects that are currently underway or that are planned that do already kind of seek or do mitigate some of those key intermediary variables that lead from climate to conflict, so food insecurity, for instance, natural resource scarcity. But those co-benefits for peace, they tend not to be mainstreamed or measured for in these activities, as we heard from some of the previous presentations as well. despite the utility that doing so may bring. So maybe just a super quick example, another element of the project was a cost-benefit analysis, in which we kind of also tried to assess how cost-effective projects, innovations related to water and food security could be if they included an active focus on peace and social cohesion. One example is that in Jordan, we worked together with a variety of stakeholders to co-develop a set of investment packages. And in Jordan, we settled on improved tillage practices whilst also developing land care groups alongside this with local communities. And it was found to have a projected internal rate of return of 13% with benefits shared across local government and local communities, whilst also obviously producing co-benefits for social cohesion and peace. So, yeah, I think in short, that's probably where we're at, but there's a lot more work to be done in terms of mainstreaming climate security more broadly as an issue in policy.
And if we want to read these reports and research, when will they be available? Are they online already? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you. Forgot about my plug, yeah. So there's a fact sheet that is currently produced, that's currently publicly available. I think the report, or a condensed version of it, will also be towards the end of the year. I believe the fact sheet is being shared by WFP. It's available from our website as well, CGR, Focus Climate Security. So, yeah, various online channels, basically, yeah.
Great, so please have a look or talk to Frans afterwards. Kaushik, I want to turn to you for the final question, actually, of the panel here. You know, we've heard most of the panelists share experience from different perspectives. Now, you know, how do we translate all of this into action, and what really do we expect, you know, in terms of these topics to come out of COP in your perspective? You know, interested to hear your reflection on this, because I think right now we're all kind of trying to assess what will come out of this COP. We know that there's a backlog of decisions that are needed, so we are faithfully trusting in you to summarize this.
and to solve questions that that the whole COP has been discussing. I think the issues are, of course, challenging. I mean, they're complex. They need, but they're complex, and they need to be. They need multi-sectoral and multi-partner solutions, and which also means that I hate to come back to financing, you know, but that is one of the theme of this COP. It also needs different types of financing, which means because you know, we spoke briefly about incentives, which means you know, so different timelines and different incentives and different risk-reward frameworks for different actors means that we need different types of financing. So a lot of this means we need to, in UNDP, what we're thinking is we need to first evaluate and learn. And it's something we want to do specifically, in fact, with the SDG Climate Facility grants as well. You know, like, I mean, Arzak just spoke about it. We need to learn from different partners. That was also, she's also a partner of the SDG Climate Facility in our Cut to Coffee project. So we need to talk to our partners. We need to conduct some rapid evaluations, see what's working in terms of framing and addressing the water security nexus, the water security energy nexus. Yeah. You know, and then we need to distill these lessons and scale them up. When we say scale them up, I mean, we are thinking of sort of scaling them up into a program, a regional program next year. We're calling it the Green Arab States Facility for Transition. So that will take up this lesson, a lot of the lessons from the COP, and see if we can sort of find more long-term financing and long-term programming. It'll be the UN, it'll be the private sector, IFIs, but also talking to governments and communities. And the key risk, I think, is sort of predictability of long-term planning and predictability of long-term financing. Another is, of course, doing sort of the risk assessments and making sure that we have developed customized and sort of context-specific design for a region. I mean, talking about the MENA region, for a region that's so volatile and so complex. We'll keep those in mind as we set up our program next year, and hopefully we can sort of develop a list of projects that will actually, a lot of these solutions are in the NDCs, a lot of these aspirations are in the NDCs. But how do we bring, you know, Ruth spoke about how water flows from upstream to downstream, but we need to make sure that the lessons come from downstream to upstream as well. Yeah. So we need to learn, exchange knowledges, exchange sort of lessons, and make sure that they come into the NDC implementation pipeline.
No, thank you very much. Please, if there are any questions, feel free to come in. But I just thought that maybe we can pass the mic because we only have a few minutes left. And I hope that in 30 seconds, maybe each panelist here can just express their reflection on what do we want to see more of in these COPs, and what are some of the, or what is a recommendation that you would give for COP28, which also happens in this region. And of course, the issues that we've talked about today, they won't necessarily be solved by COP28, but it will be an opportunity to take them further. So I don't know who wants to start. You know, what do we want to see more of in COP, and any key recommendation for COP28? Just 30-second reflection. Anybody wants to go first? Summer? Maybe we can pass the mic.
Okay, since I'm...
Kaushik?
I guess since I had the mic, I think we need to, at the next COP, we need to see, before the next COP, we need to see what the specific risks are and what the it is a climate emergency, we're all saying it, but we need to see what the potential risks are for different players. That includes communities, that includes governments, states, that includes the private sector and the global community. And then we need to educate stakeholders on what is needed in terms of changing behavior. So change behavior from the developed countries and meeting the climate pledges, all the way down to communities who need to also adapt behavior and to actually take into mind the long-term risk around water and food scarcity.
Thank you. Maybe Franz, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Well, as a climate security specialist, I'm going to say more climate security. I think it is present, but it could be present more. I think there's also some events that we've attended where there's definitely opportunities to integrate a climate security lens more effectively where it currently is not. So I think it'd be great to see more conflict sensitivity mainstream throughout the entire process. I also think with a recommendation as to next year, I think one of the key things we need in general for climate security is an evidence base. We need more understanding of what works where. And I think it would be really good if the UNFCCC, if I can say that correctly, UNFCCC architecture could be utilised more to kind of build that evidence base and create a platform to share experiences across countries.
Thank you very much. Maybe we can continue down. Ruth, we're waiting for your wisdom on the water governance side.
Well, thank you for loading that question then. Yeah, so what I would really like to see is more cross-sectoral discussion. Because as I've been here the last few days, we're talking to ourselves. I've been part of the Water Pavilion, and it's been really filled with water people talking to water people. I've been to other pavilions, the same thing is happening. And so what I'd really like to see is that we break out of our sectors and talk to each other. And I even had a little bit of this image of it's almost like a flower with petals. You know, we have something in the center, and here's the agriculture, here's the energy, here's the water, here's the, whatever. But we're all focusing in and talking to each other instead of talking to ourselves. So I really think we need to have a more holistic engagement to solve the problems, because it is a cross-sectoral, it is a multi-party problem that we're facing, and so we really need to take down these walls and all be with each other and share our knowledge and come up with new ideas, because we are now talking to each other and we have something new to come out of that.
Thank you very much. I think that came across very well. Summer, I don't know if this is your first COP, at least with WFP. Are you in shock yet? What is your reflection?
I'm not totally in shock because at Expo, I attended the two-day Future Food Summit. And I think this is a great segue into the next COP as well, which is happening in the region in Dubai. But what I want to say is that I fear that the social contract between citizens and governments is a challenge at the moment, which is similar to what we saw in 2011 in this region with the Arab Spring. Poverty, unemployment, food security now is very heavy on the agenda. Back then, no one was talking about food security. Global supply chains affected by COVID have put that on top of the agenda. So I think that if there is no concrete actions, and I liked what you just said, and in any context, we usually have what we call humanitarian response plan. I think we need to come up together and come up with a climate response plan, probably for this region, where we can see what can practically be implemented. It's good to have discussions at policy level, but if governments are not able to implement them, that is where the challenge is. The last mile is really the challenge today, whether it's in water, food, agriculture in general. So I really like us to look at it from the other side, from a human-centric approach, and build up towards the policy, because people need now action as fast as we can, rather than developing a policy and wait for the next 5 years and then we see how to finance it and implement it, etc.
Thank you very much for that. Last voice from Yemen and private sector, please.
Thank you. What I'd like to highlight is how can we empower the relationship and the partnership between the private sector and the local communities and also the government. We have all to work together for the sake of the people, for the sake of the agriculture, and also for the sake of our existence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I did that so I could summarize easier. So what I heard is that we need to really understand risk very well. We need to change behaviors. We need more climate security. We need a stronger evidence base. We need to have more cross-sectoral discussions. We need to talk to the right people. We need to preserve and maybe reinvent the social contract. We need a human-centric approach and maybe a climate response plan for this region. And we need to really empower these relationships, including with the private sector, the international organizations, and of course, the local communities that we're trying to support. So thank you very much. I know it was a long session. I hope you enjoyed it. And thanks for those that are watching online. So maybe we can give the panelists a big round of applause. Thank you very much.